The phone call came on a Tuesday evening, interrupting the first peaceful dinner I'd had in weeks. My mother's voice carried that familiar tone, the one she used when she was about to ask for something I wouldn't want to give. Alex, sweetheart, we need to talk. Can you come over for dinner this weekend? It's important. I should have known right then, should have recognized the setup, but at 27, I was still naive enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, this would be a normal family dinner. My name is Alex, and if you ask my parents, they'd probably tell you I was the difficult one in our family. Not because I was rebellious or irresponsible, quite the opposite. I worked hard, paid my own bills, kept my life meticulously organized. But in their eyes, that just made me the designated problem solver, the one expected to sacrifice a little more whenever someone else was struggling. And by someone else, I mean my older sister Emily. Emily was 30, but you'd never guess it from the way she lived. She'd never held a steady job for more than a few months, always had some excuse for why she couldn't pay rent, and somehow managed to convince everyone that none of her failures were her fault. Her boss was always out to get her. Her roommates were toxic. The job market was impossible. Meanwhile, she lived in an endless cycle of bouncing between my parents' house and whatever friend was naive enough to let her crash on their couch. I'd learned early that if I wanted peace, I needed distance. But my parents had a talent for roping me into Emily's chaos, usually with guilt trips about helping family or being lucky enough to have a good job. Saturday evening arrived with the weight of dread in my stomach. The moment I walked into my parents' house, the signs were everywhere. Mom was being unusually sweet. Dad sat quietly in his chair, avoiding eye contact. And Emily was barely acknowledging my existence, which meant she was either planning something or already knew what was coming. Dinner started normally enough. Small talk about work, Mom's passive-aggressive comments about how I never visit anymore. I focused on my food, counting down the minutes until I could escape. Then Mom set down her fork, folded her hands on the table like she was calling a board meeting, and delivered the blow. "So, Alex," she said in that saccharine voice that always preceded bad news, "your sister's going to be moving in with you for a little while." I nearly choked on my pasta. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. They were all watching me, waiting for my reaction, assuming I'd just accept it and move on. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just sat there, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, waiting for the rest of the explanation. Because there was always more. "She's had a really rough time lately," Mom continued, as if housing my adult sister was the most logical solution in the world. "And you have that nice place all to yourself. It just makes sense. You can help her get back on her feet, and she won't be a burden on us. A burden on them. Because heaven forbid my parents actually tell Emily to take responsibility for her own life. No, that was my job." Dad finally chimed in, probably feeling obligated to contribute something. "It's not like you can't afford it, and she really just needs a stable place to figure things out." Emily spoke for the first time all evening, her voice suspiciously rehearsed. "It'll only be for a few months, and I can help out with the stuff around the apartment too." That was a lie, and we all knew it. Emily didn't help with anything. She barely cleaned up after herself, but I still didn't react. I just nodded slightly, like I was considering their proposal. In reality, I was waiting for them to finish their pitch, waiting for them to commit fully to this scheme, waiting for them to make the biggest mistake of all, assuming I was actually going to go along with it. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. I could feel their eyes boring into me, searching for anger, frustration, resistance, but I gave them nothing. Instead, I exhaled slowly, set my fork down with deliberate precision, and nodded. "Okay," I said simply. For a moment, nobody breathed. Mom blinked like she hadn't expected me to agree so easily. Dad looked relieved, as if he'd been bracing for a screaming match. And Emily smirked like she'd won some invisible battle she hadn't even fought. "Really?" Mom asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I shrugged. "Sure. If it helps Emily get back on her feet, I don't see why not." The transformation was instant. My parents melted with relief, Mom launching into a speech about how proud she was of me for stepping up as a sibling. Dad nodded approvingly. Emily leaned back in her chair, looking smug. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. She probably thought she'd pulled off some masterful manipulation, that I'd caved just like always. I could picture her mentally redecorating my apartment, deciding which room would be hers, imagining how she'd rearrange my life to suit her needs. And why wouldn't she think that? She'd gotten away with it before. As kids, she'd steal my clothes and act shocked when I protested. In college, she borrowed my laptop and conveniently forgot to return it. When she got her first apartment and couldn't make rent, she convinced our parents to pressure me into covering for her. Just this once, of course. Except it never was just once. "So when are you moving in?" I asked casually, taking another bite like this was just normal dinner conversation. Mom practically glowed. "Oh, we figured this weekend. That way she can get settled before she starts looking for work again." "This weekend? Perfect." Emily stretched like a cat in the sun. "I don't have that much stuff anyway. Mostly clothes and a few boxes. Won't take long to set up." I nodded again, the picture of accommodation. "Sounds good. Just let me know what time, and I'll be there." That part wasn't a lie. I would absolutely be there. Not at the apartment, of course. No, I'd be somewhere much better, watching from a safe distance as Emily, my parents, in a car full of her belongings, pulled up to my former apartment. The one I hadn't lived in for weeks. The one I'd sold. The one that now belonged to an entirely different tenant who had no idea what was about to happen. The days crawled by like a slow-motion countdown to disaster. Every time I thought about what was coming, I had to bite my lip to keep from grinning. But I maintained perfect composure around my family. No suspicious behavior, no hints about what they were walking into. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, perfect weather for the chaos about to unfold. I spent the day running errands I'd been putting off for weeks, staying far away from my old neighborhood. My phone would start ringing soon enough. Around noon it began, an unknown number, probably the new tenant, confused about why strangers were trying to move into their apartment. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, my phone exploded. "Hello?" I answered, injecting just the right amount of casual confusion into my voice. "Alex!" My mother's voice cracked through the speaker, tight with panic. "What's going on?" I could hear Dad in the background, his voice raised in frustration. They weren't angry yet, just disoriented, like they'd walked into the wrong movie theater. "What do you mean?" I asked, the picture of innocence. "We're here at your apartment," Mom continued, her words tumbling over each other. "But the landlord says it was sold weeks ago. There's a new tenant living here now. They don't know who we are, and they're threatening to call the police if we don't leave." I couldn't suppress the smile tugging at my lips. "Oh, really? That's so weird. I had no idea." "What do you mean you had no idea?" Dad's voice cut in, sharp with growing frustration. "Alex, what's going on? You promised Emily she could move in, and now we're standing here with all her stuff, looking like idiots." The beautiful thing was, I could hear Emily in the background, her voice rising in panic as she tried to piece together what was happening. It was music to my ears. "Listen, I don't know what to tell you," I said, keeping my voice maddeningly calm. "I guess I should have mentioned it sooner. But I moved out a few weeks ago, sold the place, didn't think it was really relevant anymore, you know?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "What do you mean, sold the place?" Mom sounded like she was trying to process words in a foreign language. "You sold your apartment? You didn't even tell us?" "Yeah," I said, drawing out the word like I was discussing the weather. "It was kind of a last-minute thing. I guess I didn't want to make a big deal about it. New chapter and all that." Dad's voice rose to a near shout. "So what are we supposed to do now, Alex?" "Emily had plans. We've already packed everything up. Don't you think we deserve to know what was going on?" I leaned back in my chair, savoring every second. "You know, I really thought you guys would have figured it out. I guess I assumed you were more aware of my situation. You know how I am. Quiet, keep to myself. Maybe I should have called, but honestly, I didn't think it was that important. You didn't ask, and I didn't offer." The frustration was practically radiating through the phone. Mom's voice had taken on that edge of helplessness that meant she was completely out of her depth. "But you told us you were happy there," she protested. "You said you loved your apartment." I was happy, but things change, I replied smoothly. The offer was too good to refuse. I'm sure you understand. A heavy silence stretched between us, broken only by Emily's increasingly frantic muttering in the background. Why didn't you tell us, Alex? Dad's voice was trembling now, caught between anger and disbelief. You could have at least warned us. Now we're stuck here, and Emily— Look, Dad, I interrupted, my voice taking on just enough edge to cut through his protests. You're acting like I did something wrong. I'm just living my life and making my own decisions. You know how things go with me. I do what works for me, and I don't check in with everyone else every step of the way. I mean, I'm not a kid anymore. Before Dad could respond, Mom's voice broke through. So what are we supposed to do now? Are you going to fix this, or should we just drag everything back home? I let the question hang in the air for a long, beautiful moment. Well, I said finally, I guess that's up to you. You could always, you know, figure it out yourselves. I'm sure there's a nice couch somewhere for Emily to crash on. Another silence. I could practically feel the tension crackling through the phone lines. This isn't fair, Alex, Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. You're just going to leave us to deal with this? I sighed dramatically. Look, I'm sorry things didn't work out the way you planned, but you can't expect me to always be the one picking up the pieces when Emily's life falls apart. Maybe it's time for her to figure things out herself. Emily's voice broke through again, louder this time, a cocktail of fury and desperation. What is this, Alex? What game are you playing? I grinned wider. I don't know what you want me to say, Em. Maybe you should have gotten your own life together before counting on other people to solve your problems. Anyway, I continued breezily, I've got to run. Good luck with everything, though. I'm sure it'll all work out somehow. And with that, I hung up. But the story was far from over. An hour later, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on my actual apartment's stairs. Heavy, determined, angry footsteps. I looked through the peephole and almost laughed out loud. There they were, my parents, Emily, and what looked like half her worldly possessions, crammed into garbage bags and cardboard boxes. They'd tracked me down to my real address, probably through some combination of detective work and sheer stubborn fury. I opened the door slowly, making sure to project perfect calm. Well, this is a surprise, I said, leaning against the doorframe like I had all the time in the world. Alex? Mom's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. We need to talk. You need to make this right. Make what right? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Don't play dumb, Dad snapped. You said Emily could move in with you. She has her things. We don't have anywhere else to go. That's the thing, though, I said, crossing my arms. I never said Emily could move in here. The realization hit them like a physical blow. Emily's face flushed bright red. This is ridiculous, she shouted. You're really going to do this to me? After everything? I stayed quiet for a moment, watching their expressions shift from confusion to frustration to embarrassment. This was the moment they realized they'd been played, and I was going to savor every second. Look, I said finally, taking a step closer. I don't know how to put this any more clearly. This is my apartment. I didn't sell it. I didn't give it away. And I'm not offering free housing to anyone. Not anymore. Emily stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. You're not even a real brother. I'm family, Alex. What happened to being there for each other? I looked at her blankly. I'm not throwing you out, Em. I'm just not letting you in. That's when Emily snapped. Fine, she screamed. If you won't let me in, we'll make you. She actually lunged toward my door, and for a brief moment, I thought she might try to force her way past me. But that was exactly the moment I'd been waiting for. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Hello, I said, keeping my voice steady while making direct eye contact with all three of them. I need to report trespassing. My family's refusing to leave my property after I've asked them multiple times, and I'm feeling unsafe. The color drained from their faces as they realized what I was doing. Emily's mouth fell open. Dad looked like he was trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Mom had gone completely silent. This is going to end badly for you, Emily muttered, her voice venomous. I smiled. We'll see about that. The police arrived within 10 minutes, A tall female officer with short brown hair and a no-nonsense expression. She looked at me first, then at my family, who were now shuffling awkwardly on my doorstep like kids caught breaking into a house they didn't belong in. "Good evening," the officer said, her voice firm but professional. "I understand there's an issue here." "Yes, officer," I replied calmly. "These people showed up at my apartment, expecting to move in without permission. I've asked them to leave multiple times, and now I'm concerned they might try to force their way in." The officer turned to my family. "Is this true?" Emily was the first to speak, her voice cracking with indignation. "He's lying. He invited me here. We came to move in like he promised, and now he's trying to throw me out after everything I've done for him. I'm his sister. I deserve this." The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, if this gentleman has told you this is his property and asked you to leave, then you're trespassing. You can't show up to someone's home uninvited and expect them to accommodate you." Dad tried to jump in. "Look, officer, we didn't mean any harm. We thought Alex would be okay with it. We've helped him before, and he owes us. This isn't fair." "I understand you may have had expectations, sir," the officer replied evenly, "but that doesn't give you the right to violate someone's boundaries. You need to leave. Now." The officer turned to Emily. "You can either leave quietly or we'll escort you out." Emily let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a sob. She was seething, and I could see her mind racing, trying to find some angle to challenge this. But before she could say anything else, the officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, this is your last warning. If you don't leave immediately, I will place you under arrest for trespassing." The weight of those words hit my sister like a slap. Slowly, reluctantly, she backed away from my door, shooting me a look of pure hatred. My parents followed, Mom's face twisted with frustration and shame. As they loaded Emily's belongings back into their car, the officer glanced at me. "If there are any more issues, don't hesitate to call us again." "Thank you, officer," I replied. And just like that, they were gone. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a long moment. The silence was deafening after so much chaos, but it wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. For the first time in years, I could breathe without looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next manipulation would come. My phone buzzed with angry texts and voicemails for the next few days, but I blocked their numbers one by one. Emily called me everything from selfish to heartless, but her words bounced off me like rain off a window. It's been 3 weeks now, and the peace is intoxicating. I've been able to focus on my career, my friendships, my own dreams without constantly being pulled into someone else's drama. I wake up each morning in my own space, surrounded by my own choices, accountable only to myself. Some people might say I was too harsh, that families should forgive and forget. But I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive patterns. Emily will figure out her life, or she won't. But either way, it's not my responsibility anymore. I'm finally free to be exactly who I choose to be, without apology or explanation. And that, more than anything else, feels like coming home.